My Maine Camping Nightmare, written and narrated by Katherine Harrison. We all love a good creepy story around the campfire at night, especially as the weather begins to cool down and the colorful foliage of impending fall approaches. The lone cry of a wolf in the distance as you settle in for the night. This is my horrific story that took place in Maine. I have lived in Maine my whole life and have heard many creepy cautionary stories and creepy legends. I always loved a good ghost story that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand straight up and resulting in full-body goosebumps. This story I am about to share with you is no exception. It was a crisp, warm day in September, what we Mainers call Indian summer. I decided to go camping and head into the Maine woods alone for an overnight trip. I left early that Saturday morning. The dew was still glistening on the ground as I packed up my camping equipment into my car. The birds were cheerfully singing in the trees. Some of the leaves were gently falling onto the ground in the slight breeze. The sun was shining so brightly as I drove about an hour from my home. I knew of a place that was secluded far away from the hustle and bustle of neighboring towns, where I could relax with the sights and sound of nature uncontaminated from civilization. I pulled into a gravel parking lot where people park their cars for the day to go hiking and to enjoy the splendor of Maine's nature. I parked my car and quickly grabbed my backpack and camping equipment. I packed light knowing I was alone and had to carry all I needed for my overnight adventure. I put on my backpack and started my way off into the woods on a well-beaten path that many have taken. I walked for a few miles until I found a secluded spot of the beaten trail. I felt confident that I was far away from other campers and hikers so I could have the solitude of being alone. I found the perfect spot nestled in between some huge pines. There was a small clearing near a small pond, so I decided to set up camp here. Breathing in all the forest smells of the pines and the warm air caressing my face, I instantly felt relaxed and happy as I pitched my tent and quickly set up my camp for the night. I decided to go collect enough firewood to get me through the night. There was lots of dead branches and rotting trees covering the forest floor. I collected lots of wood in a short amount of time and made my way back to my camping spot. Placing the firewood in a makeshift fire pit I created with rocks to contain the fire. I decided I was a bit hungry and foraged through my backpack for a can of Dintimore beef stew and an old cooking pot I brought with me. It didn't take long for the stew to heat up over the crackling fire and didn't take long to relax from the mile hiking. The sun was just starting to set behind the mountain tops in the distance. A slight breeze was blowing and you could smell the leaves and trees of the pine forest. It was perfect. I finished my meal and pulled out a spooky book to read by the campfire and kill some time before going to bed. As I sat there reading my book, I heard a stick cracking from the weight of something walking nearby my camp. My eyes grew larger, leaving my book, scanned the woods in the direction of the sound. I didn't see anything, so I just brushed the sound off as a squirrel or possibly a raccoon being inquisitive about the smells coming from my campfire. It was a beautiful night. The moon was shimmering over the water's surface. I loved listening to the sounds of the animals and birds settling down for the night. I was beginning to feel quite calm and peaceful as I watched the water skippers breaking the calm surface of the pond. Until I heard another stick crack. but this time it sounded like something heavy was walking close by. You know that uneasy feeling you get like someone is watching you? I quickly reached for my flashlight and pointed the light into the surrounding forest. I sat there quietly, listening for more movement, but I didn't hear any more movement. Again, passing the sound off as a forest creature or an approaching moose or possibly a deer, it was about 9 at night when I stood up and took a huge stretch. Deciding it has been a long day, I decided to retire to my tent for the night. I climbed into my tent, taking my boots off at the door, zippering up the tent. I settled down into my sleeping bag, using my backpack as a pillow. I quickly drifted off to sleep. I must have been exhausted. Several hours passed by before I was woken from my slumber to the sounds of footsteps walking nearby my camping spot. I nervously grabbed my flashlight, slipped my boots on, unzipped the tent, and went outside to have a look. The cool night air added even more of a chill to the increasing fear that was starting to well up within me. I stood there in front of my tent, listening again for more sounds. Scanning the trees that surrounded me, when I heard the rustling sound coming from a bush about 100 yards away from me. I sat there holding my breath, becoming hypersensitive to every sound around me. I swear the sounds get louder as the sun sets in these Maine woods. So many local tales, legend, and superstitions in Maine all seem to play back in my head, reminding myself there is always some truth behind these myths, and it is so easy for your mind and thoughts to run away with you. I raised my flashlight again to take one last look before I made my way back into my tent, still feeling uneasy. I swear I saw movement and caught a glimpse of eye shine. You know that shine of an animal's eyes at night? This was a bit alarming for me because the eye shine was not low to the ground like a raccoon's eyes would be. The eyes I saw in the darkness were at least 5 feet above the forest floor. The hair on my body began to rise up, and that eerie feeling washed over my body. The light of my fire was just a light glow from the smoldering embers, so I threw a few logs on the embers, hoping the fire would come back to life. Hoping that the rekindled fire glow would light up my camping spot and scare away anything that was approaching my space. As the fire soon sparked back to life, I could see a bit deeper into the pine forest that surrounded me. As my eyes adjusted to the lighting of the fire, I swear I saw a huge shadow move further back a ways from me as I heard the heavy footsteps moving away from me. Was this a person or a huge animal? This thing was trying to obscure itself from me and the light. I know I saw its shadow slip behind a huge tree. Keep in mind I had only a small hatchet with me that I used for collecting firewood. I grabbed my cell phone from my pocket, using my camera to snap off a few photos to see if I could catch a glimpse of what was stalking me. As my flash clicked off, I heard heavy footsteps running further away from me. Letting out a sigh of relief as the campfire glowed, I threw several more pieces of wood on the fire. I made my way back into my tent, noticing the time on my phone, 3 o'clock. I nervously laid back down, fearful to sleep, wanting to be vigilant for any incoming sounds. I must have been tired. I found myself drifting back off to sleep. An hour or so must have drifted by as I was woken to the sound of something brushing up against my tent. I did not turn on the light this time, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I sat straight up, hugging my sleeping bag, trying to control my fear as I listened harder, trying not to make any movement. The light of the campfire was still illuminating my campsite, and that is when I saw it, the fire casting a huge shadow towering over my tent. My heart started to racing faster. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as my pulse quickened. I decided to lay flat in the fetal position in case whatever was outside took a swipe at my tent, and that is when I heard the creature outside my tent making grunting sounds, almost like the sound of a bear rummaging through my stuff. I almost convinced myself it must be a bear, but that scenario was lost as I watched the shadow stand upright bipedally next to my tent. The size was huge. And that is when the smell permeated the inside of my tent, the smell of wet dog and a dead deer. I quietly grabbed my hatchet, knowing that the hatchet would cause minimal damage at best to this creature standing outside. There I was in the fetal position, white-knuckled, holding on to my little hatchet, as I listened to this monster thing just a few feet away from me, just outside, rummaging through my things. I felt as though my heart was about to leap out of my chest. That is when the creature let out a mighty roar. I couldn't move. I was frozen in fright. I was literally still shaking in my boots as I heard this beast finally make its way back into the woods. I don't know how long I laid there in the darkness, not moving, until I heard the early morning tweets of the birds begin as the sun slowly began to rise over the horizon. I waited there until I felt safe enough to make my way out of the tent. I slowly and quietly unzipped my tent, just poking my head outside to take a quick look. Nothing was there. I quickly began to gather my scattered camping gear that was thrown all about, and as I went to kick dirt on the smoldering fire, that is when I noticed a huge footprint next to my fire pit. I briskly made my way through the forest, being hyper-vigilant, listening and looking for anything that may be following me. Arriving back to my car, I swiftly threw my gear in the back seat, locked my doors and started driving, but as I drove away I caught a glimpse of my stalker. I didn't relax again until I was back to the safety of my house. This was the last time I ever camped in the woods of Maine.